Very good to see another full crowd here at the Middlebury Institute, and my name is Jason Scorse. I'm the director of the Center for the Blue Economy, and we're really happy to have Deborah Cramer here tonight for a information policy packed evening, we just got a preview, little student gathering, and I know you're in for a treat. So I just want to make a few quick announcements. The first is we're very happy for the Loker Hicks Family Foundation the Loker Hicks Foundation for the sponsorship of the Center for the Blue Economy for making this possible, and then for the Hayward Family Foundation that provided the funds for this specific event. And the schedule for the evening is going to be soon. My colleague Judy Kildow will introduce Deborah, and she will talk for approximately about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll have a short Q&A. And oh, sorry, Deborah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Judy will introduce Deborah, who will then talk for 45 minutes. And then we'll have a short Q&A and just a little preview for the Q&A. We will do, we'll give, you'll raise your hand and we'll pass a mic to you. And the key thing here is question, not lecture, not story, question. Okay, so I'm going to be the guy with the gong, and if you start rambling, I'm going to embarrass you because we want questions, okay? And then we have an extra treat. We'll have a book signing. We have a number of books, and we're going to sell them to you at a substantial discount because we love you in the Monterey community, and you'll get to meet Deborah. And the small, tiny bit of proceeds that we'll make are just going to go to, pay for a fraction of the price of this event. We are filming this event, so just to be aware of that. There's a camera. We're filming this, and we'll put it up on our website. And before I just tell you a little brief about the center, please take this moment to turn off your cell phones so we can have this kind of interruption-free. And real quickly, the Center for the Blue Economy, we're in our 5th year here at the Middlebury Institute, and we do ocean and coastal economics and resource management. We have a graduate program, we have a journal, and we have a pretty intense research program that's grounded in our National Ocean Economics program. And without getting into the details here, it's just we're trying to put that economic dimension and piece to the oceans and the coast because we think that has a lot of currency for conservation and preservation, and it's a good way to get conversation started with a lot of the movers and shakers in this world. And the final point I'll make is that we have our students in the back there interpreting, and so this is going to be simultaneously interpreted into Chinese, Russian, and German, so that's one of the beauties of working at this institute is we're kind of international all the time. And so thanks a lot for coming, and Judy will now introduce Deborah.
Good evening. I'm Judy Kildow, and I'm the director of the National Ocean Economics Program that is at the Center for the Blue Economy. It is my great pleasure to introduce Deborah Cramer tonight because I have known Deborah for 40-some years, we've figured out today, which is really startling to both of us. She was my first research assistant at MIT when I was a young professor there, and we have remained friends ever since, which says something for a professor and a student. It's a gift for a professor to be able to maintain a relationship like this. She's a graduate of Wellesley College. She was a student at MIT, and she's also family to us at Middlebury because she is a graduate of the Breadloaf program. And she claims that I introduced her to oceans, and Breadloaf introduced her to the most marvelous education and literature and writing. And so I feel that she's family, that we've kind of helped a bit of her career along to help her be this incredible author. So just to quickly say something about her book, and then I'm going to let her take over. I've read her book, plodded through it, I have to say, because it is so loaded with information. You cannot read it quickly, as any of you who may have tried to. But to me, her red knot, the star of her book, or one of the stars, is the canary in the coal mines to us. And we really need to see it this way. And I also see her, and maybe it's my bias because she is a former student and good friend, as the Rachel Carson, in a way, of our era. Her metaphor of the red knot as the indicator of our changing world and what we're doing to it is very much to me what Rachel Carson was in the 60s, introducing us to the brown pelican and its terrible threatened life, and the dangers of chemicals and DDT in the environment. And I see such parallels in the Silent Spring in this book that if you haven't read it, I think that you would really enjoy it because it's just stunning. So I just want to say that she has been reviewed by so many of our very, very most respected authors and environmentalists. And I just want to kind of leave you with one thing. Tom Lovejoy, who is now a National Geographic fellow, conservation fellow, said that reading her book is better than watching the Kentucky Derby in a way. And there's one saying, and you're going to have to help me, Deborah, because I can't get this straight, about the flying, the quote. What? Oh, that there's something that the message from the book is, keep flying and you'll find your way. So it's a hopeful book. It's not all gloom and doom, and I hope that you will enjoy the evening with Deborah tonight. Thank you. Okay, is this okay? Can everybody hear me now? All right. No, they can't hear me. All right, is this better? Yes. Okay. So, Judy, thank you so very much. We really miss Judy now that she's no longer with us on the East Coast. But Middlebury Institute is blessed to have your expertise, your vision, and your dedication. So we're sort of reluctantly but happily letting you stay here. I am delighted. I think this is the first time that I've ever given a talk that has been connected in any way to Middlebury College. And it's true that studying at MIT with Judy gave me a lot of the political and strategic skills that inform a lot of what I do. But it's also true that getting a master's in American literature from Middlebury College taught me a lot about how to listen to people, how to read people, and how to write to be heard. And those two as a combination, I don't think I could do without either of them. So it's great to be here at Middlebury and to be able to thank Middlebury. And then lastly, I'm really honored to be with all of you in the hotbed of marine research and conservation in this country. I mean, Monterey is really different from every place else. And it's an honor for me to be with so many people who are so committed and dedicated to protecting the sea and the sea edge. Now, okay. As some of you know, I'm the author of 2 books. This one, Great Waters and Atlantic Passage, and this one, Smithsonian Ocean, Our Water, Our World. And I loved writing these books. I loved the community I got to know writing them. And I also wanted to thank, because there are a lot of NOAA people here, NOAA, because it was NOAA scientists who insisted to the Smithsonian, who didn't have any idea who I was, that the Smithsonian asked me to write this book, Smithsonian Ocean. So I am very grateful to everybody at NOAA. Now for this 3rd book, and I'm pretty slow. I mean, it's about a book every 7 years. I moved the story to the edge of the sea and the nearby coastal islands. And it called upon all the people I already knew, plus an entirely new community of people. So tonight, in talking about this book, I'm going to begin by talking about the title, because this is perhaps the most important and was certainly the most agonizing
and divisive and conflict-ridden part of writing this book. It's a really hard thing when you spend 4.5 years working on something to try to boil it down to 8 evocative words. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the thinking that went in to putting together this title. The narrow edge, that liminal, porous place belonging to both land and sea, a place astonishingly rich and fertile, and yet increasingly congested and fragile. Its edges are neither fixed nor firm, yet so many of us in the United States and throughout the world are now living along the sea edge. You know this place. A tiny bird, the red knot, a bird you may not know. Sandpiper, it weighs no more than a coffee cup, but it flies along the edge of 2 entire continents, practically from pole to pole and back, every year. It's a bird that captured the hearts of 2 eminent ornithologists writing more than 60 years ago when abundance had a very different definition than it does now. To these men who'd seen more than their share of charismatic, colorful birds, including many of the fabled ivory-billed woodpecker, this less conspicuous bird represented, and I'm quoting from them here, an untrammeled wildness and freedom that is equaled by few and surpassed by none. A bird that so many people today have never even heard of. An ancient crab, in this case the horseshoe crab, lives out on the continental shelf, comes ashore but once a year, in spring's high tides and new and full moons to lay its eggs in the sand. Its eggs fuel the migration of many shorebirds, and its blue blood safeguards our own health. An epic journey of the birds, traveling an extraordinary 19,000 miles every year, staying aloft for days at a time, building their nests in one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. To me, their journey became an affirmation of life. An epic journey of the horseshoe crab, not across space like the bird, but across time. The horseshoe crab is one of Earth's oldest animals. It has survived every one of the planet's mass extinctions, including the one that wiped out 97% of all life in the sea. And then lastly, an epic journey of the people in this story. People like you, whose dedication, country by country, year by year, season by season, and beach by beach, are repairing our torn world and renewing life at the sea edge. You guys are not in this book, but you will see yourselves in these stories. This book is about a bird and about horseshoe crabs, but as I wrote it, it came to be about much more. It came to be about how we carry ourselves in this world, and it came to be about beauty. Now, I traveled for thousands of miles to places I never imagined I'd be, and places in all likelihood I may never see again, accompanying this bird. And I can't take you everywhere this evening, but I'm going to take you to a few of the homes of the red knot. So on the cover here, you have what I call the studio shot of the red knot. But here it is, if you've never seen it, on the beach in its breeding plumage. This is what the red knot looks like. Now, their journey begins in their winter home here on the beach at Bahia Lomas. This is a vast, windswept beach along the Strait of Magellan. The beach extends for mile after mile after mile, broken only by the occasional guanaco leaping the fencing from the adjacent upland estancias, and the only sound, the sound of the wind. The tide is coming in this picture. The flats here are 7 miles wide. So this is When the tide is out, the mud is going all the way to the horizon. So this is the only beach, and I've stood on a lot of beaches, but this is the only beach in the world where I've ever stood at low tide where I've looked out and not been able to see any water, even though I've been on the edge of the sea. Now the birds come in with the tide, and from a distance they look like tiny wisps of smoke, and then the wisps materialize into these giant flocks that kind of look like, I don't know, a big butterfly gliding across the mud flats. And then as the water comes in, the birds come in like this. And you can't see us in this picture, but we're standing there in what is the largest concentration of red knots and possibly their last remaining home in Tierra del Fuego. An American and a Canadian brought news of this place to the wider world, looking for the winter homes of red knots at a time when research money was a lot easier to get than it is now. These guys drove 2,000 miles down the coast of Brazil and Argentina in a cheap, dilapidated Citroën that fell apart literally as they drove. And they got all the way down to Rio Grande and they missed this place. One of them returned a few years later in an airplane and discovered it. Now the numbers of red knots are dropping. At this point, I like to think about their journey to the Arctic as being on a ladder where now every rung is necessary and broken ones along the way can jeopardize the entire trip. There are many, to me, heroes in this story, and I'm going to just tell you about a couple of them this evening. This first one is Carmen Espos. She's Dean of the Faculty of Sciences at a big university in Santiago, Chile. But this beach is where she feels she's at home. She works all day here, which in the summer is all night, in the blustery wind, which is often blowing at hurricane strength, following the birds for 7 miles in and out with the tide, figuring out what they're eating, how the abundance of their food is changing, and why their numbers are dropping. And in this remote, isolated place where there are few people, part of the reason probably lies up here with the rest of us. Now from here, the birds go to a very different place. This is the beach in Las Grutas, Argentina. For those of you who like to go to faraway resorts on vacation, this is the hottest up-and-coming beach place in Argentina. I took this picture early in the morning, but the beach rarely looks like this. It's usually full. The water is quite warm here. It's deliciously warm. So the beach is usually bopping. There's probably usually maybe, I don't know, 500 or 600 scantily clad bathers out on this beach, ATVs racing up and down, and the birds are trying to eat clams and mussels before the tide comes in and covers them. So this is a very difficult place to work. But this woman, Patricia Gonzalez, is working here. And because she's Argentine, I wanted to consider her tonight in the context of the Pope's encyclical on global warming, where he said that he hoped we may be, quote, filled with awe and contemplation of the natural world, that we may recognize we are profoundly united with every creature, and that we might channel this recognition into our own action. And to me, she was embodying this message long before he made this statement. She is single-handedly inspiring an entire generation of kids to care about the sea edge. And I was able to see this with her firsthand when I went to Argentina. I saw kids that had come from hundreds of miles away, spending part of their vacation earning the money to come down there, which is a very difficult thing in this country right now, to be on the beach with her tracking birds. And in the summer, they literally walk in her footsteps. She makes them follow in her footsteps on the beach so nobody scares the birds. But they also want to be exactly like her when they grow up. And I saw that. talking to some of the winners of the high school beauty pageant in Las Grutas. These girls once wanted to marry movie stars and live lives of glamour. And they still want to live lives of glamour, but today their definition of glamour is being a marine biologist or a park ranger. And it's all of them. And it was really exciting to talk to them. And Patricia is a remarkable woman. And how does she do this? She invites people to recognize our profound connection to shorebirds. So she has this sign, which is out on the mud flats, that says, "We are all shorebirds." And she asks people to consider how the health of shorebirds is intertwined with our own, how what's at stake for them is also at stake for us. And I explore this idea at depth in the book. I have to, when we're on the brink of losing a bird that so many people have never heard of. And mostly tonight, I'm going to show you pictures. I figure if you want to read the book, you can actually read the book. But in a few places, I'm going to read you a few quotes. So in terms of thinking about our relationship to shorebirds, this is one thing that I said. Flying from one home to the next along their migration, redknots carry an imprint of each home. The quality of their lives in one enhanced or diminished by their lives in another. At the end of their journey, they have taken the measure of a shoreline running the length of the earth. And today, that shoreline in many places is wanting. The birds need sustenance and safe harbor along the way. And by that, I mean this. This is a skinny red knot in November in Argentina. It's just arrived, and it's hungry. And over the next 5 or 6 months, it's going to double its weight so that it looks like that. Now, the reason for doubling its weight has to do with this map. Now, this is a data logger that was on one red knot whose letters on its flag are YOY. And the only thing that I want you to see looking at this is that this bird flew 3,000 miles south in 8 days, and 5,000 miles north in 6 days, and these are all non-stop flights. So if you don't like numbers, you can think about going from the Brazil-Peru border up to the Outer Banks of North Carolina without stopping. So aside from the enormous physical stamina required to make these navigations, how do these birds know where they're going? Are they navigating by Earth's magnetic field? Maybe. We're not really all that sure. Are they navigating by the stars? That seems likely. We've watched them take off so many times just at dusk. One thing that researchers do know is that these birds have a phenomenal sense of weather systems. They understand weather systems that move across entire ocean basins. And the way one researcher described this to me, he said, shorebirds always know where they are relative to where they are going. And then the same question, he said, might be asked of us. Do we know where we are relative to where we're going? And I'll leave you to think about that. This map is of the Rufa subspecies, red knot, that was just listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act this year. It is the first U.S. shorebird listed under the Endangered Species Act whose existence is imperiled by global warming. It is not going to be the last. Now, I accompanied these knots and their companions along the sea to many places, to Crowded Beach in Florida, where I watched many ibis sauntering among the picnic tables before people had arrived, to the mouth of Georgia's Altamaha River, which flows unimpeded to the sea in an estuary lined with conservation restrictions, most of which are held by the Nature Conservancy, enabling the sandbars to retreat as the sea rises. It was a wonderful place to watch birds. I went to Texas, the home of 2 red knots, the one that goes up the Atlantic Flyway, Rufa, and Rosolari, the one that flies up the Pacific coast, going up the coast of California to Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor, and then on to Alaska. The number of these birds is also quite low. It's actually lower than the rufa, and this bird also probably requires a federal listing under the Endangered Species Act. So I just wanted to tell you a little about Texas. In this plane, which you see painted brightly, some might say garishly, like the Texas flag, we were swirling and swooping for hours on end over the Laguna Madre, trying to find birds with radio tags, always under the watchful eye of the Department of Homeland Security, because the radio signals were taking us what to them was uncomfortably close to the Mexican border. And it was just this astonishing thing. We were up in the sky getting all these phone calls from the Department of Homeland Security, and then we were looking down and we could see the Department of Immigration walking all over the place trying to find walkers coming in through Mexico. Well, we were looking for birds whose homes know no political boundaries. And we were finding an undocumented place where they still find shelter and a long forgotten route that they still take north. It was really exciting for me to be with them while these scientists were finding this out. And that work is going to be very important as the Fish and Wildlife Service decides how best to protect the birds this year. Now, I also watched them here in Delaware Bay. This is the largest concentration, of red knots along the Atlantic in the spring. And it's a place where no one, including David Sibley and Roger Torrey Peterson, knew about it except the locals until the late 1970s, which says a lot about what lies hidden before us in plain sight. These birds are eating the eggs, the pin-sized eggs of the horseshoe crab. Now, I wanted to show you this picture. This is the greatest concentration of horseshoe crabs left in the world here in Delaware Bay. And the reason I wanted to show you this picture is because this is a picture of scarcity and not abundance. There used to be millions and millions more of these in Delaware Bay. This animal is one of Earth's oldest animals. Very few animals that were alive then are alive today. And the animal keeps getting older. So when I first wrote Great Waters, the horseshoe crab was about 350 million years old. By the time I finished this book, it was 475 million years old. But it wasn't because it took me 125 million years to write the book, even though I'm very slow. It was because an artist went into a jack pine forest in Manitoba looking for a flat rock in which he could make a painting, and instead he found a horseshoe crab fossil on a rock. And he took it to a paleontologist at the Royal Ontario Museum. And then a poverty-stricken anthropologist who was doing his PhD here, and he really was poverty-stricken because nobody really wanted to do anthropology here. This is the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. And he spent a long time wandering in the desert, this guy. And it took him 2 years to persuade a fossil dealer he'd met at some bazaar that he was actually trustworthy. And after he persuaded the guy, the dealer's son and the paleontologist hired a taxi cab, went down 5 hours on a rutted, washed-out road into these mountains, which are now becoming rapidly recognized as one of the world's most important sites of fossils. And if you look at the animals that lived in the sea here, because this is all old seafloor that's been pushed up into the mountains, these are fairy tale animals. They're giant torpedo-like shrimp that are 5 and 6 feet long, with names with 4 and 5 syllables, like Animalocaris, that like you've never heard of. But the horseshoe crab was in these fossils, and it's still here. And you can, I think, understand the scale of its longevity if you collapse the history of the Earth into 1 year. And if you do that, the horseshoe crab evolves around in the spring, around the time of the solstice. The first bird evolves in the fall, And we stroll in a few minutes before midnight on December 31st. Now, to me, this raises a very serious ethical question of who we are, such late arrivals, to be saying who will come and who will go. Now, the reason I included the horseshoe crab in the talk this evening is because while there aren't any horseshoe crabs along the California coast, these animals are nonetheless very important to you. Their blue blood, I said, was essential to our health. It constitutes the only test approved by the FDA to sense certain kinds of deleterious bacterial contamination in our drugs and medical devices. This kind of endotoxin contamination is very serious, and the best description of it is actually not mine, but Lewis Thomas's. And this is what he wrote about it in The Lives of a Cell. He said, the human body treats endotoxin as, quote, the very worst of bad news. Sensing it, we are likely to turn on every defense at our disposal. We will bomb, defoliate, blockade, seal off, and destroy all the tissue in the affected area. The result, he says, for humans is a shambles. The consequences including fever and inflammation, low blood pressure, respiratory distress, suffocation, shock, and death. Now, you are probably completely unfamiliar with those side effects of endotoxin contamination. However, if you've ever been vaccinated, had IV antibiotics or chemotherapy, PET scans, knee replacements, hip replacements, your life has been touched and made better by a horseshoe crab. Research exploring the roots and progression of dementias like Alzheimer's that today are affecting more than 5 million people depend on lighting up the brain with a tracer that cannot be contaminated with endotoxin. So I was really lucky. I went to Mass General. The first day one of these tracers had been approved by the FDA. I got to see them manufacture the radioactive tracer. I got to see them test it with the horseshoe crab blood, and then I got to see them bring it down to the patient that was waiting for it for his PET scan. But we kind of take this for granted. Now, for the many shorebirds who depend on horseshoe crabs, here are the eggs scattered on the beach. Now, I'm just going to give you a few numbers here. Each crab lays 80,000 eggs in a season. Each knot needs 400,000 eggs to double its weight. 40,000 knots need 16 billion eggs. So we're talking a lot of eggs. And you see here, they're on this beach. This picture was taken, I think, last year. They're in a very thin coating. Now, the eggs used to be so thick in Delaware Bay, you could take them away by the wagonful. That's how many crabs used to be there. And you used to be able to walk on the backs of dead crabs for miles. And I think that, although my editors kind of got angry at me about this after a while, I think that researching this old history of what used to be is a very important thing to do. And this is what I said about it. As we feel the passage of time, day to day, month to month, and year to year, we may not see the gradual accumulation of loss or feel the urgency as we accept the still beautiful but greatly diminished world we come into, knowing no other, and not realizing or asking what that world was or could be. Instead, we argue over the scraps that remain. And it's why, as we think about how we're going to be protecting shorebirds, it's really important to consider this history so we know what it is we really want. Now, what happened in Delaware Bay? In Delaware Bay and in New England, we took too many horseshoe crabs for bait and deprived the birds of the sustenance they needed, and so they couldn't make it up to the Arctic to breed. There's a moratorium on the bait fishery in New Jersey, and quotas elsewhere in Delaware Bay. What that has accomplished after 15 years of regulation is to stanch the decline. It has not restored the population yet. Now, compounding the problem is the edge of the sea where they spawn and the birds forage is eroding from development. And the bulkheads and the seawalls that are built to protect that development, increasing the rate of erosion. So to give you a sense of what that's doing, Hurricane Sandy, when it occurred in Delaware Bay in New York, in Delaware Bay, Hurricane Sandy was a 25-year event. By 2050, with the rising sea level, that storm surge is going to be happening once every 2 or 3 years. All the sand replacement in the world isn't going to be able to keep that beach there. Now, it's important to remember, though, that the sea has risen and fallen for millions and millions of years, and the horseshoe crabs have followed the sea as the sea level has come up. The difference here is that we're blocking the way right now. And the second problem is that a rising, warming, and increasingly acidic ocean is threatening the knot's primary source of food everywhere except in Delaware Bay and the Arctic. So this is the blue mussel, and almost every stopover along the flyway on the Atlantic side and also on the Pacific side, these birds are eating not these big guys, but the spat of the blue mussels and tiny coquina and dwarf surf clams. And back home, that is in New England, we've analyzed the impacts of ocean acidification on our $1 billion shellfish industry, but we haven't looked at all at what the cost is going to be to all the birds. So in an attempt to encourage this to happen, I wrote this op-ed piece for the New York Times, which they called Silent Seashores, where I calculated how many North American shorebirds we've lost since I was graduated from college. And I realized that was in the Stone Ages, but it wasn't that long ago. And it's half, or 12 million shorebirds. And that was a shock to me, because I've been walking the beaches for 30 years, and I didn't even notice this. Now, losing these birds is unconscionable, from my point of view, and unnecessary. And the birds and the horseshoe crabs are really strong. We just need to give them a shot. Now, but what is the purpose of doubling your weight every time you land, and where are they going? So this is one more picture of Delaware Bay, where instead of having 4 months to double their weight, they have to do it in 10 days. Now, that would make us extremely sick if we had to do that. But they do it in 10 days every year. And the reason for this is they're heading up here. Now, this is a piece of gravel in East Bay, Southampton Island, which is just south of the Arctic Circle. You can see on this so-called runway, there's no light, no radar, there's no room to make any mistake. There's water on both sides of this ridge, or snow. And this was a sunny day, and the bush pilots dropped us off here after we had been grounded for days in a Iqaluit on Baffin Island to the east of here. And the reason we couldn't fly was that the pilots could not distinguish between the snow on the ground and the clouds in the sky. And so it was too unsafe for us to be in the air. And I only had to wait 5 days. The entire team that had come up earlier, they were stuck there for 2 weeks during this blinding storm. And finally, there was a day of sunshine, and we all took off, and we arrived, and we got out, and we were walking around, and one of the kids on this shorebird team, this was a project sponsored by the National Wildlife Research Center in Canada. This is the longest running shorebird camp in the Arctic, and they go up every year for 8 weeks to monitor shorebirds. And we got off the plane, And they were so excited, that I was with them, and we were going to be looking for knots. And this kid just said to me, "Deborah, I found one, and it's got a flag on it." And so we went over, and I read the flag off, and we were allowed 5 minutes of satellite phone time every week. And so I blew my 5 minutes, having only been there for 2 hours, and called somebody and said, "Would you please look up this bird with this flag number on it? I want to know about this bird." And the guy called me back and he said, "Well, Deborah, this bird was in Delaware Bay when you were in Delaware Bay, and was in Delaware Bay a week after you were in Delaware Bay. And so it beat me up there and flew through that storm and was there when we were there. And I have no idea how that bird did that. To me, that was just a shockingly wonderful thing." Now, the birds stayed outside, warmed by whatever fat they had left and their feathers, and we were in here in what one magazine article that used this labeled with quotes around our deluxe quarters. And I asked them not to put that in the caption because I thought it was deluxe. I mean, we had 2 tents and a cabin. And then we had this cabin, which was really wonderful because the windows, you can see, are constructed to be particularly narrow. And the reason for that is that if polar bears were trying to get in at night, we would be sure to wake up. And when I heard that, I was really grateful. This is the kind of bunk accommodations we had. And I wanted to show you this picture of Megan McCluskey. She was on the shorebird team. She was another hero of this. She actually saved my life out there. But I wanted to show you this picture of her. First of all, she's freezing. She's got on every piece of clothing she owns, and she's inside. But you can see she's quite happy. And she wasn't just posing. She just loves being up there doing the research. And here they are, Megan and Naomi, taking a little break through the shorebird, trekking. And they were pretty happy, too. But this is really what we were doing all day. This is the I would say aptly named Inconvenience Lake. Inconvenient because the water is over our heads and because the snow is melting. And the reason that we are dragging ourselves across this is that if we stood up, we would sink to our waists in the snow. And if you've ever sunk that deep in the snow, you know it's really hard to get out. So we would have to cross this lake every day, and then we would walk 8 to 10 miles looking for shorebird nests. And we had these GPSs to try to figure out where we were. And you can see they're wearing waders because we went through a lot of really deep ponds. And we had these guns. These are in the tent where we were eating. We kept them there. We kept extra slugs on the table all the time. And the reason for all that is this. And 15 years ago, 10 years ago, you would not be seeing this on the tundra here about a kilometer in from the edge of the sea. You just wouldn't be doing that. And the reason for that is this. The sea ice is melting, and you can see how thin it is there, and a polar bear isn't exactly going to be walking across that and finding a 150-pound seal to eat every 3 days, and so they were coming ashore because they were hungry. And this is totally changing the face of the Arctic. Nonetheless, it is still an extraordinarily beautiful place. Well, wait, excuse me. Whoops, I forgot that I had this one here. This is what happens when a polar bear can't get a seal, and it's really hungry. It scales a sea cliff. These shorebird researchers, as I said, have been out there for 20 years. They never saw this until a few years ago. You can do the protein math yourself and figure out that there really aren't enough eggs there to satisfy the hunger of polar bears. It's a kind of starkly beautiful place up there. That's the Inuit Kamatuk. It's the sled that the Inuit used to move back and forth across the snow and the sea ice. And this is an Inuit street sign. And I was really happy to see those. This is an indecipherable landscape. And we were out there 10 to 12 miles every day in the cold, and we had many redundancies to make sure that nothing horrible happened to us. We had radios, we had GPSs. We were told, even though we were walking 10 or 12 miles away, never to keep the cabins, never to be in any situation where we couldn't see the cabins, because that way we had 3 ways of getting back. We had a radio, we had a GPS, and we could look. And then one day the fog came in, and we all of a sudden couldn't see the cabin anymore. It also was a really freezing day, and after 8 hours, the batteries start going on everything, and we lost our radio, and we were about to lose our GPS, and we knew the batteries weren't going to last all the way home. And so Megan, who had memorized this landscape, started leading us through it, and we found this, and we were extremely happy to see it. Eventually, spring comes up here. It's a very short spring. It's a very short summer. But the ice starts melting on the tundra, and flowers start blooming. They don't get any higher than this, but they're still really, really beautiful, the saxifrage. And then the air is just filled with singing birds. So I just thought I would show you a few of them. These are Arctic terns, king eiders. People where I live travel tons of miles. They come up from all over New England to come see the one king eider in Gloucester Harbor that you need, the most expensive spotting scope on the planet to be able to see. And these were like nesting right by our cabin. Red-throated loons, the ruddy turnstone. This bird, the numbers are dropping just as much as the knot. The knot is really the bellwether for so many other shorebirds. Here's a knot on its nest, pretty camouflaged. Here are the eggs. And the eggs don't always hatch. There's only 2 predators up there, but this is one of them, and you can see this Arctic fox is pretty satisfied. I don't know what he's been eating, but he's been eating a lot of it because he let us come pretty close. And then here's the knot up close on a nest again. Now, if the eggs do hatch, then what happens is, from my point of view, the most extreme version of free-range parenting I have ever come across. The eggs hatch and the mother doesn't care anymore. She's gone. She's out of there. She's finished. She leaves. The father sticks around because the birds are very far from water. They're half a mile, a mile and a half from water. So he walks these birds that huge distance down to a pond or down to the edge of the sea. And once they're there, he leaves. And they haven't even started to fly yet. And so they're all by themselves. And so as the migration south begins, it happens in stages. The mothers come, and then the fathers, and then the chicks. And they start heading south over another truly indecipherable landscape. This is the Canadian muskeg. And they go to James Bay here, where again we spent 10 to 12 miles every day tracking shorebirds. Every morning, these guys got up to see me walk in front of them, and after all those polar bears, it was fine. I mean, I knew they weren't going to hurt me. And then they stuff themselves on clams, not the bears, the birds, on clams in James Bay, and then they spread out along the flyway going south. So this marsh could be anywhere along the eastern seaboard of the United States or anywhere coming south here. And in the fall, they start coming through. Now, I was talking to the eBird editor for Monterey County, and I was looking all this stuff up. So these birds were through here pretty recently, and I just thought I would share that with you. In April, they were in the Elkhorn Slough. They were on Pebble Beach in May. In July, they were at the mouth of the Salinas River. In October, they were at Moss Landing. And Don Robertson was telling me that the highest count of red knots this century has been 14 birds at Moss Landing. But that in 1983, he saw them in flocks of 83 or more. But he said those numbers, those days of numbers like that are long gone. So because of these declining numbers, this book, because I don't really like to misrepresent anything, had to be a book about grievous loss. But as I traveled along this flyway and met so many people and watched this bird for so many hours, this story for me came to be as much, if not more, about resilience, tenacity, endurance, courage, beauty, and compassion. And this is evoked from many ways in this book. And I'm just going to give you one example and then read you something and stop. Now, the example was that when I returned home after what was a horrible nesting summer in the Arctic, it was a late September day, maybe early October. We took our kayaks out. I live on an estuary in Gloucester, and we went down the creek and out into the bay to a stand of marsh grass, and we beached the kayaks, and we stood there in the grass watching on the other side of the grass as the tide came in. And as the tide came in, the birds started gathering along the edge of the sand, and we waited and waited and waited, and then finally we saw them. We saw 3 juvenile birds. And a juvenile bird is a baby bird is a beautiful thing to see because its plumage is really fresh, and it was shining in the late afternoon light. And I saw these birds heading south on a route they'd never traveled, going to a place they'd never been, having come so many miles with so many more to go. And there they were in my backyard. So I'm going to read to you one paragraph. Red knots speak to us of distant realms, uniting us along a line that stretches along the entire edge of continents. Their long flights through an immensity of sky that reaches from one end of the earth to the other embody our own longings and dreams. As we lose our own bearings, their long flights offer a compass. In the tenacity of horseshoe crabs appearing on a moonlit beach, and in the resilience of shorebirds, a flock of knots lifting into the evening sky at Bahia Lomas, the gentle voices of shorebirds singing in the Arctic stillness, a lone bird flying through a hurricane, I find hope that we can face the challenges that lie before us, and hope in the possibility that our children will inherit an earth where wildlife will still have a home at the edge of the sea. Their home is ours. We stand together, all of us, on this narrow edge in a time fraught with challenge, but still filled with promise. Thank you. Do I do this? Okay. So, do we have time for a few questions? Okay.
So people who want to ask questions, just raise your hand. We'll bring you a mic.
There's somebody right there.
So a question about timing. How is the timing of the northward migration of the red knot coupled with the horseshoe crab? And is it offset now? And one of the other foods is the blue mussel, and on the northeast coast of the United States, that population seems to be collapsing.
Okay, did everybody hear the question? There was a question about the timing of the horseshoe crab and the red knot and the blue mussel. How that timing occurs or why it occurs is really one of the most miraculous things in nature, because these horseshoe crabs are coming in from the continental shelf. The birds are flying all the way from Tierra del Fuego, and they arrive instantaneously. And I've seen that so many times now. It's just shocking. So I'll be on a beach in Georgia, South Carolina, Delaware Bay, and there won't be any red knots, and there won't be any horseshoe crabs. And then one night, the horseshoe crabs will come into spawn, and the next day, the birds will all be there. I mean, have you seen this? It's just an astonishingly beautiful thing. And so the question is, has this coupling changed at all? And it's interesting because the Fish and Wildlife Service is really worried that that's what's going to happen, because the spawning is triggered by water temperature. So the thinking is that if the water temperature rises to 50 degrees sooner, the horseshoe crabs will be spawning and the birds will not have arrived yet. That has not happened yet. The Fish and Wildlife Service is anticipating that it's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. In fact, at least at the moment, the opposite is happening. Because the weather's warmer and it's milder, the kinds of huge storms that used to come in that would make Delaware Bay really rough and keep the horseshoe crabs out in the water haven't been happening. So sometimes there's a storm that runs through that will disrupt the entire spawning season. That hasn't happened for 3 or 4 years, and everybody's really grateful about that because the numbers were so low that they couldn't afford to have something like that happen. So they're expecting that's going to happen, but it hasn't happened. Now, do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. These birds are really smart, so they may figure it out. I don't know. The mussel thing is more of a problem. That is actually a very serious problem. So that, for example, in the range of the blue mussel has contracted north. I think it's 200 miles in 5 years. So the barrier islands off the coast of Virginia, which are a very important stopover place for red knots coming north, on those barrier islands, those birds are eating mussel spat that's growing in the peat on the islands. And now, those mussels cannot reproduce there. So the only mussels that are coming in is spat coming in from the deep water and maybe coming south. If it keeps contracting, there's not going to be any blue mussels there for them. Now, whether another kind of shellfish will come in or not, we don't really know yet, but the scientists down there are really worried about that. Okay?
What is mussel spat?
Little mussels. They haven't really anchored really tightly to the, they're a little bigger than that, but they're just, think of them as like really tiny mussels. Yes.
Would you mind repeating the locations and dates that, or months that red knots were seen in the Monterey area?
Oh, yes. You can also check that. Do you know about eBird? Well, the eBird entry for Monterey County is now accurate. So you can just go to ebird.org, type in, you go to the Explore Data area, you go to the species thing, and you type in red knots, and then you type in Monterey, but I'll just give you the listings. April in Elkhorn Slough, Pebble Beach in May, July, how do you pronounce Salinas? Salinas, okay, I got that wrong, sorry. July at the mouth of the Salinas River. October at Moss Landing. Now, they used to winter at Moss Landing, but they're not doing that now, unless somebody's going to contradict that. Okay, somebody has different information? Oh, so it's you, okay. So this is the source. Tell me where I misunderstood you.
As to wintering, there's still a small number wintered, like we think we had 3 that wintered last winter. The number decline we've really noted more in the migrant birds. The spring migration really peaks late April, early May. They're gone by June. The first adults arrive back in July. The juves come in September, October, and then they're gone. And maybe we have 2 to 3 that winter in Elkhorn Slough. Elkhorn Slough and the Salinas River mouth are by far the most productive areas. Something on Pebble Beach is quite rare and scarce, like one in Point Pinos happens, but not very often. So they will, go ahead.
So where would you tell people to go look?
Elkhorn Slough is by far, and I've written a book called Monterey Birds that has a bar graph of this, but you can also see it in eBird data and look for the exact peak weeks.
Yeah, Don has a book which has the history of the birds in Monterey County, and you can see the history of all the shorebirds and the numbers there if you are not familiar with that book.
Yeah. Did you talk about the population estimate for the 2 different populations on the East Coast and the West Coast?
Yes, I'm happy to, although there is controversy, of course, about the numbers. But the West Coast population, the Rosalari, is around 17,000. That's very low. The reason that a listing has not been proposed for that bird is because that bird doesn't, this is a cynical answer, I'm really sorry. That bird doesn't have the advocates out here that the Atlantic bird has, and so there's a much longer history out there of the trends in the population numbers. And I think the Fish and Wildlife Service is trying to accumulate that information for Rosalari right now, which is why I took all of Don's information and forwarded it to the Fish and Wildlife Service. Now, the RUFA was down to, well, the RUFA, about 26,000 RUFA pass through Delaware Bay every spring. The total population may be around 40,000. Now, there's a lot of history counting birds in Delaware Bay, so that 26,000 is a small percentage of what used to be at least 150,000. Does that give you a sense? Now, Tierra del Fuego is another matter. I mean, the numbers are very low in Tierra del Fuego. So I think there were 12,000, maybe 15,000. When I went, that's way, way down. And then last year, I think there was only 2,000 or 3,000. So we have to, like, get on this.
I'm not sure I understand what you said, and I'd like you to clarify.
I'll try.
You said that the mother leaves, and then the father leaves, and the chicks have to figure out how to get where they're going to go on their own?
That's what I said. I
Wow.
know. For all of us hovercraft parents, that's kind of shocking. Randall had one. Oh, back there.
Thank you. So I like your topic. Get on it. What can we do as humans on the planet to try to, in some mild way, mitigate some of these terrible catastrophes, besides closing off beaches in Patagonia and trying to protect Delaware Bay? Or in our area, we have islands. We have Berry Islands in the East Coast. We have islands near where I live that are now off limits. In the Caribbean, we have turtle beaches that you cannot visit for months on end besides the obvious restriction in development and minimizing human traffic, are there any other positive things we could do?
Well, I think, well, I guess maybe we disagree a little bit. I think giving up a beach to shorebirds for a few weeks every year is a positive thing. So I think closing off beaches, as long as everybody understands why we're doing it, is a great educational thing, and it has to be done properly, though. I think that's a really good thing. I think, you know, the list of things is really long, Randall, and so I don't want to, like, take up the next half an hour talking about this. I think it's very important to give money to conservation organizations that are purchasing easements along the coast, because the water is rising, and it's going to rise faster. And what the Nature Conservancy has done at the mouth of the Altamaha River is truly amazing, because they have the restrictions on the islands in the mouth, but they're also slowly moving their way up the estuary, so as this water rises, the marsh is going to be able to retreat, the beaches are going to be able to retreat, and the marsh can recede inland. And it's really important, like particularly up in New England, that we start protecting the upland from the marsh, so that the marsh has a place to go. I think that there's a lot that can be done about development along the sea edge. I feel that in New England and along the East Coast, there is a ton to be done with the horseshoe crab. I mean, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission is the agency responsible for regulating horseshoe crab take. After 15 years of regulation, if the best thing they can do is stanch a decline, we have not done enough. So what we need is a coast-wide moratorium on the bait fishery. And this doesn't necessarily have to put bait fishermen out of business. The University of Delaware has developed an alternative bait that's kind of a, what the best way is to describe this. It's a seaweed power bar that has a bit of invasive Japanese shore crab in it, and it's just as attractive to whelk and eel as horseshoe crab. The studies confirming the efficacy of this bait have now been out for at least 3 years, and the best the ASMFC, that is the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, can do right now is consider having another test study. And the reason they are behaving so lethargically is that the rest of us are sitting there silently while they continue to make decisions that benefit their own financial short-term interests. And I don't know whether we should get like 200 people and like bust the next ASMFC meeting. I mean, they need to hear that we know what they're doing. And I got them a lot of negative attention on the op-ed page of the New York Times. That really helped. And then there's the whole fossil fuel stuff. I mean, but that's a different topic. Is that enough for right now? Okay. Judy, are you the last question? Okay. Yeah.
Uh-oh, no,
My
just
teacher.
No, 2 questions. No, I'm not any longer your friend. 2 questions. What was to you the scariest thing that happened to you during the 4 years of this journey? And what was maybe the most wonderfully exciting thing that happened to you?
Okay, so she wanted to know the scariest thing and the most exciting thing. I hate questions like this. Sorry. It's all right. There are a lot of toss-ups in both categories. But I would say high on the list for the scariest thing was when the National Wildlife Research Center of Canada invited me to go. You're not allowed to discriminate against people on the basis of age. So I started getting very peculiar emails from them, like, how fit are you? And how much exercise do you do every week? And I would say things like, well, I swim my heart out for an hour and a half, 3 times a week, but should I be wading through the ocean at water up to my waist for 2 miles every day? What should I be doing? And we kind of worked our way through that, and that was working out okay. And then I got an email that said, when you go to Canada, you will need a gun license in Canada. You will not be able to get this gun license in Canada unless you have a gun license in the United States. So would you please get yourself a gun license in the United States? And I would say that probably the scariest thing on this trip was, and I guess I have to preface this, I met a lot of hunters. My whole idea about hunting has totally changed. We protect the birds we kill to eat a lot better than we protect the birds that we don't kill to eat. Hunters have done us a tremendous service. So I am not talking about hunters right now. I'm talking about how frightening it was to go into a class whose place shall remain unnamed to get a gun license in the United States, where I was terrified by the number of young men in that class who were eager to start stockpiling weapons when we had a test that consisted of 20 multiple choice questions with a pre-test, practice test, that was the exact same thing as the test itself, and it was open book. And we spent 4 hours talking on a diatribe against the Massachusetts gun control laws and 4 hours shooting pistols at targets. And then I go down to the police station and I ask for my license, and I ask for a Class B license because I don't think I need a Class A license. And I hear that the instructor in my class does not want anybody who graduates from his class to have a Class B license. So I can carry a concealed weapon anywhere I want to. And frankly, I find that a little unnerving. I mean, and the Canadians were horrified. He called me and I said, Grant, I have my gun license, I'm so excited. And he said to me, oh, I'm not. I want to know what you learned in that gun class. I said, I'll tell you, but I don't think you're going to be too interested. And he said, that's what I thought. You get up here a day before. And I got up to Ottawa, I got sent to a shooting range. I was given a private instructor and told I couldn't leave until I could hit a can of beans out of a barrel with a 12-gauge shotgun. But that wasn't anywhere near as scary as being in the class here. So what was exciting? I think what was exciting for me was that I met so many people who are just so dedicated to this, and they are completely convinced that this problem can be solved. And this is after they've spent their entire professional lives experiencing defeat after defeat after defeat, but it really isn't. Like, it's 3 steps forward, 2.5 steps back, and they're doing it over and over again. And I just realized, I was looking at what they were doing. I was looking at I don't know how to say this, the gratitude and the love that they were giving to protecting this bird and to protecting this sea edge. And it was deeply, deeply moving. And then when I watched this bird, I mean, I can't tell you like what it's like to have like thousands of dollars worth of equipment and all this stuff going up to the Arctic, and this bird has nothing. And that like happened every time, everywhere I was. And I just looked at that and I think, my God, if these birds can do this, we can do what we need to do. And what are we complaining about? Okay, that's it.
All right, everybody, so a reminder, Deborah will be signing books upstairs in the lobby, so please go get your signed copy. I want to give a big shout out to Rachel Christopherson for setting this whole thing up. And let's give Deborah another round, because that was awesome.